I bought my parents a house, but they gave it to my golden child sister because she needs it more. 6 months later, they showed up on my doorstep with their bags, deciding to move in with me, so I offered them to live. My name is Emily, and I've worked at Horizon Investments for almost a decade now. I started as an entry-level analyst and clawed my way up to investment manager through countless late nights and sacrificed weekends. The past year has been particularly intense. I led 3 major client acquisitions that our CEO called transformational for the company. The stress nearly broke me, but the bonuses that followed made it all worthwhile. Last Thursday, I was reviewing my accounts when I realized something that stopped me mid-sip of my morning coffee. Between my regular salary and these recent bonuses, I had accumulated enough money to do something I dreamed about for years: buy my parents a proper house. Mom and Dad have lived in the same dilapidated 2-bedroom on Cedar Street for over 30 years. The roof leaks every time it rains, the foundation is cracking, and the heating barely works in winter. They've always refused my offers to help with repairs, saying it wasn't worth throwing good money after bad, but they also refused to move, citing financial constraints. I called my realtor friend Sarah immediately. "I need a house," I said without preamble when she answered. "Well, hello to you too, Emily," she laughed. "Tired of that downtown apartment already?" "Not for me, for my parents," I replied. "Something small but solid, in a safe neighborhood, walking distance to groceries and medical facilities, and with a good-sized yard for Mom's gardening. Dad's arthritis is getting worse, so minimal stairs would be ideal." Within a week, Sarah had found the perfect place: a single-story, ranch-style home in Oakwood, a quiet suburb with excellent amenities. 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and, best of all, a beautiful south-facing garden plot. At $385,000, it wasn't cheap, but my bonuses could cover it entirely. I toured it on a Tuesday and signed the papers on Wednesday. The closing process was expedited since I was paying cash, and within 3 weeks, I had the keys in hand. I hadn't told my parents anything. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. That Saturday, I drove to my parents' place for our regular family dinner. My sister Clara would be there with her husband Tom and their 5-year-old daughter Sophie. Clara is 2 years younger than me, and we've never been particularly close. Where I'm practical and focused, Clara is emotional and impulsive. She's bounced between jobs and apartments for years, never quite finding her footing. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual tight hug. "Emily, you're early for once. Come help me finish the potatoes." The house smelled of pot roast and cinnamon comfort scents from my childhood that always made me feel at home despite the peeling wallpaper and sagging ceiling. Dad was in his recliner, watching baseball and rubbing his knees absently. "There's my big shot," he said with a wink. "How's the investment world treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied, kissing his cheek. "How's retirement?" "Boring as hell," he grinned. "Your mother keeps threatening to give me a honey-do list a mile long, but there's not much point fixing up this old dump." The doorbell rang, announcing Clara's arrival. Sophie burst in first, launching herself at my legs. Tom nodded to me, already making his way to the kitchen to grab a beer. Clara gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. "Nice blouse," she said. "Expensive?" "Just picked it up during a sale," I lied. There was no point telling her it was Burberry. Dinner was the usual affair: Mom's cooking, Dad's stories about neighborhood gossip, and Clara talking about her latest job prospect that was definitely going to work out this time. I sat quietly, the envelope with the house documents burning a hole in my purse. As Mom started clearing plates, I stood up. "I have something for you all," I said. "Well, for Mom and Dad specifically." Clara looked up sharply. "What is it?" I pulled out the envelope and handed it to my father. "Open it." He fumbled with the clasp, eventually extracting the papers. Mom leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. "What is this?" Dad asked, confusion evident. "It's a house," I said simply. "Your house, if you want it. Fully paid for, no mortgage." It's in Oakwood, near the shopping center and the medical plaza. 3 bedrooms, all on one level. And Mom, there's a garden that gets perfect southern exposure. The silence was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her mouth and Dad just stared at the papers. I don't understand, Mom finally whispered. You bought us a house? Yes, I nodded. You deserve a nice place for your retirement. Somewhere safe and comfortable that won't fall down around your ears. I pulled out my phone, showing them pictures of each room, ending with the garden. Mom started to cry, and Dad wasn't far behind. They both stood and enveloped me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. Over their shoulders, I could see Clara's face. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes hard. Tom was staring at his beer, clearly uncomfortable. Wow, Emily, Clara finally said. That's really something. Congratulations, Mom and Dad. But the congratulations sounded hollow and her smile never reached her eyes. The next day, I picked up my parents early in the morning to show them their new home. Dad was uncharacteristically quiet during the drive, but Mom couldn't stop talking. I still can't believe this is real, she said for the 10th time. Our own house, and in Oakwood of all places. Janet from my book club lives there, and she's always bragging about how nice it is. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom gasped. The house wasn't large or fancy by any means, but compared to their old place, it was a palace. Red brick with white trim, a covered porch with enough space for 2 rocking chairs, and a neatly trimmed lawn. This is ours? Dad asked, his voice small. I nodded, handing him the keys. All yours. Want to do the honors? His hand trembled slightly as he unlocked the front door. The entryway opened into a bright living room with large windows that flooded the space with morning light. I'd had the real estate company stager leave some basic furniture so it wouldn't feel empty. Oh, Mom exclaimed, rushing forward. She ran her hand over the kitchen countertop, opened and closed cabinets, tested the faucet. Look at all this counter space. And a dishwasher. Dad slowly made his way through each room, touching walls and door frames as if confirming they were real. When he reached the backyard, he stood for a long moment, staring at the garden plot. Mom joined us, already talking a mile a minute. I'll put cucumbers along that fence, and maybe some zucchini over there. And flowers, dahlias, and marigolds to keep the bugs away from the vegetables. And right there, we could set up a little table and chairs for morning coffee. We spent the next hour going through every room, with Mom pointing out where each piece of their furniture would go and which wall she wanted to paint. Dad was mostly concerned with the water heater and furnace, checking them thoroughly and nodding with approval. This is quality stuff, he said. Not like the junk we've been dealing with. So, when can we move in? Mom asked eagerly. Whenever you want, I told her. The utilities are already turned on and in your names. I paid the first year of property taxes, too. A week later, I took a rare day off work to help with moving day. I'd hired professional movers, of course, but I wanted to be there for support. Dad hated accepting help almost as much as he hated change, and I anticipated some grumbling. The movers arrived at 8:00 a.m. sharp, and by noon, most of my parents' belongings were packed and loaded. There wasn't much worth salvaging. Their old furniture was mostly worn out, and many of their appliances barely functioned. Still, they insisted on bringing everything. By late afternoon, we were at the new house, directing the movers where to place furniture. Mom seemed energized by the whole process, darting from room to room with instructions and ideas. Dad, on the other hand, looked overwhelmed. I found him sitting on the front porch steps, staring at the moving truck. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him. Just taking a breather, he replied. Lot of changes today. Good changes, though, right? He nodded slowly. Good changes. Just a lot of them. He patted my hand. I'm proud of you, Emily. You've done well for yourself, better than I ever did. That night, after the movers had left and we'd ordered pizza because no one had the energy to cook, I helped Mom make up the beds while Dad fiddled with the TV setup. What are you going to do with the old house? I asked. Mom sighed. tucking in hospital corners with practiced efficiency. Put it up for sale, I suppose. Not that anyone will want it except for the land. That part of town has gone downhill. You might be surprised, I said, though I doubted it. Their old neighborhood had high crime rates and few amenities. Whatever you get for it will be a nice little nest egg. We'll need it, Mom said pragmatically. Property taxes and insurance will be higher here, even with you covering the first year. Over the next few months, I threw myself back into work. A new client had approached Horizon with a complex portfolio that needed restructuring, and I was determined to land the account. Between late meetings and weekend strategy sessions, I only managed to call my parents once a week and visit maybe twice a month. Each time I visited, the house looked more and more like a home. Mom had planted her garden as promised and was already harvesting the early vegetables. Dad had set up a workshop in the garage and was building birdhouses to sell at the local farmers market. They both seemed happier and healthier than I'd seen them in years. During one of our calls, Mom mentioned that Clara had been visiting frequently. She brings Sophie over almost every weekend, Mom said. It's so nice having them close by. Sophie loves helping in the garden. That's great, I said, ignoring the slight twinge of jealousy. I was glad Clara was spending time with our parents, but it stung a little that she could do so regularly while my career kept me too busy. Clara mentioned she might be looking for a new apartment soon, Mom continued. Her landlord is raising the rent again, and Tom's hours got cut at work. Is she hinting that she needs money? I asked, perhaps more sharply than intended. No, Mom said quickly. Just thinking out loud, I suppose. You know how Clara is. I did know. My sister had never been good with money or planning ahead. Every few months, she'd find herself in some financial crisis that required bailing out usually. That fell to me. Well, tell her to call me if she needs help with a security deposit or something, I said. You're a good sister, Mom replied warmly. I wasn't so sure about that, but I tried. 3 months flew by in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights at the office. I'd managed to land that big client I was working on, which meant another substantial bonus, but even less free time. I called my parents when I could, keeping our conversations brief but warm. They always sounded cheerful, settling into their new routines and neighborhood. Dad had joined a veterans group at the community center, and Mom was now part of the local garden club. One Tuesday evening, as I was about to head home after a 14-hour workday, my phone buzzed with a text from Clara, having my birthday at Mom and Dad's next Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Family and some friends. Be there. I frowned at the screen. Clara hadn't mentioned planning a party during our last awkward coffee meetup 2 weeks ago. It made sense, though Clara and Tom's 2-bedroom apartment was cramped even for just the 3 of them. The new house had a spacious living area and backyard, perfect for entertaining. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to get Clara. Finally, I settled on a high-end coffee maker, the kind that grinds the beans fresh and makes everything from espresso to cold brew. Clara was obsessed with coffee, but always complained about the cheap machine she had. This would be perfect. Saturday arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house just after 6. The driveway and street were already lined with cars. I grabbed the gift-wrapped coffee maker from my passenger seat and headed inside without knocking. It still felt strange to do that at my parents' new house. The living room was full of people, mostly relatives I recognized from holidays and family gatherings, plus some friends of Clara's I vaguely remembered meeting over the years. A long table had been set up with an impressive spread of food, and music played from a portable speaker in the corner. I spotted Clara immediately. She was sitting at the head of the dining table, Tom beside her, holding court as she told some animated story to a group of admirers. She looked happy, confident, almost glowing. My parents, on the other hand, were off to the side, serving drinks and looking oddly nervous. "Emily," Mom called when she saw me, hurrying over. "You made it!" "Can I get you something to drink?" Mom's eyes darted around the room. never quite meeting mine. Your father grilled those kebabs you like. Better get some before they're gone. Something was definitely off with her, but before I could ask, she was rushing away to refill someone's glass. I set the gift with the others and made my way around the room, greeting relatives and accepting congratulations on the house purchase. Everyone seemed impressed with what I'd done for my parents, which made me uncomfortable. I hadn't bought the house for praise. Dinner was served buffet style, and I ended up sitting between Aunt Linda and Uncle George, making small talk about my job and their recent cruise to Alaska. Every so often, I glanced over at my parents, who seemed to be growing more anxious as the evening progressed. Dad kept checking his watch, and Mom was fidgeting with her napkin. Meanwhile, Clara looked completely at ease, laughing loudly and refilling wine glasses. After dessert, a beautiful cake from the expensive bakery across town, Clara announced it was time for gifts. She sat back at the head of the table while everyone gathered around to watch. She opened each present with exaggerated excitement, making sure to thank each giver effusively. Once all the gifts had been opened and admired, I expected the party to wind down. Instead, my father cleared his throat and stood up, wine glass in hand. Mom rose to stand beside him, her expression a mixture of nerves and determination. "We've got one more announcement to make," Dad said, his voice slightly shaky. "Margaret and I have been talking, and we've decided to give this house to Clara and Tom." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The room went eerily silent, then erupted in confused murmurs. Our relatives looked from my parents to me, clearly uncomfortable. Mom stepped forward. "We've signed the papers already. The house will be transferred to Clara's name next week." She finally looked at me, her expression almost pleading. "We think it's for the best." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Clara wasn't surprised at all. She jumped up and threw her arms around our parents, tearfully thanking them for the best gift ever. Tom stood beside her, grinning widely as he shook Dad's hand. The relatives in attendance shifted uncomfortably, shooting sympathetic glances my way. They all knew I'd bought the house for my parents just a few months ago. I stood up, legs unsteady beneath me. "Can I talk to you?" I said to my parents, trying to keep my voice level. Privately, the four of us, my parents, Clara, and I, stepped into the kitchen while the party guests pretended not to notice. "What is going on?" I asked once the door was closed. "I bought this house for you, and we appreciate that," Mom said quickly. "But it's our house now, and we can do what we want with it." "You've had it for 3 months," I exclaimed. "I spent nearly $400,000 so you could have a safe, comfortable place to live in your retirement, not so you could give it away." "It's not like Clara's kicking us out," Dad said defensively. "We'll still live here until we figure out our next steps." "Next steps? What next steps? This was supposed to be your forever home." Clara stepped closer to me, her face a mask of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Emily, you need to calm down. Mom and Dad made their decision. If you were really being generous, you'd be happy for me too. I have a family, after all. Sophie deserves a nice home to grow up in. I've helped you plenty over the years," I shot back. "Every time you've needed money for rent or car repairs or Sophie's school tuition, who paid for it? Me." This was different. "This was for Mom and Dad. Those were just handouts," Mom said, her voice suddenly cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Quick fixes so you didn't have to really get involved in our lives." I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about? I bought you a house. And you visited, 4 times since we moved in?" Dad added. "Clara comes by several times a week. She brings Sophie. They have dinner with us. They help around the house. Because I've been working," I protested. "Someone has to earn the money that pays for all of this. If you cared about your sister the way you claim to care about us," Dad continued as if I hadn't spoken, "you would have bought her a house too. You know they've been struggling, living paycheck to paycheck in that tiny apartment." I looked at each of their faces, Clara's barely concealed triumph, Dad's stubborn defensiveness, and Mom's cold disapproval. The weight of the betrayal hit me all at once. "Fine," I said quietly. "You're right. It's your house, and you can do whatever you want with it. I turned and walked back into the living room, grabbing my purse from where I'd left it on the couch. I nodded stiffly to the remaining guests, some of whom tried to stop me with concerned questions, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Clara saying something about me being dramatic, followed by forced laughter. The next morning, my phone started ringing before I'd even had my coffee. Cousin Laura, Aunt Linda, Uncle George, all calling to check on me and express their disbelief at what had happened. For the next few weeks, my parents called daily. I let each call go to voicemail. The messages started apologetic, then shifted to irritated, then finally moved to guilt-tripping. I listened to each one but couldn't bring myself to call back. What was there to say? I threw myself into work with renewed intensity. 60-hour weeks became 80-hour weeks. I took on clients no one else wanted. I volunteered for business trips that kept me out of town for days at a time, anything to avoid sitting in my empty apartment with my thoughts. 6 months passed this way. Fall turned to winter. I declined the usual invitation to Thanksgiving at my parents' house or Clara's house, I supposed. I made plans to spend Christmas in Bali alone. My parents stopped calling as frequently, down to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. One Tuesday evening in December, I arrived home from work to find them standing outside my apartment building, suitcases at their feet. They looked older, tired, and out of place against the sleek, modernist architecture. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk to you," Mom said. "Please." I sighed and led them up to my apartment. They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. "We were hoping we could stay with you for a while, just until we find our own place." I stared at them, incredulous. "Are you serious?" "We had to leave the house," Dad explained, not meeting my eyes. "Clara and Tom wanted to renovate, and there wasn't room for all of us with construction going on. So you gave them your house, and now you have nowhere to live?" I said flatly. "We rented an apartment with the money from selling our old house," Mom said, "but the lease is up next week, and we can't afford to renew. Your father took a part-time job at the hardware store, but it doesn't pay much." "No," I said simply. "What do you mean no?" Dad demanded. "I mean no, you can't stay here. I bought you a perfectly good house to live in, and you gave it away. That's not my problem to solve." Mom's face crumpled. "How can you be so heartless after everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me lately?" I asked. "Besides throw my gift back in my face and accuse me of not being generous enough? You're being cruel," Mom said, tears filling her eyes. "I'm being realistic," I countered. "I already solved your housing problem once. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and earned me nothing but criticism and ingratitude. I'm not doing it again." "Then where are we supposed to go?" Dad asked. "How about Clara's house? The one that used to be yours? The one I bought for you? Surely your favorite daughter can make room for her beloved parents." They looked at each other uneasily. "Clara says there's no space with the renovations," Mom murmured. "Then that's between you and Clara. It's not my problem." I walked to the door and held it open. They stood there for a long moment, staring at me in disbelief, before finally gathering their suitcases and walking out without another word. After they left, I called Clara. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice wary. "Mom and Dad just showed up at my apartment expecting to move in with me," I said without preamble. "They said you kicked them out because of renovations." She laughed dismissively. "I wouldn't say kicked out. We're converting the guest room into a proper playroom for Sophie. They could have stayed, but it would have been cramped. Besides, it's our house now. It was supposed to be their house," I reminded her. "I bought it for them. Look, I don't need another lecture from you. They gave the house to us. End of story. If you're so concerned about where they live, why don't you let them stay with you?" She hung up before I could respond. I blocked her number immediately after. The next day, my cousin Laura called to tell me that my parents had moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. Dad had taken on a second part-time job as a night security guard, and Mom was looking for work as a cashier. They're telling everyone it's your fault, Laura said, that you cruelly turned them away in their time of need. Let them say what they want, I replied. I know the truth. For what it's worth, most of the family is on your side, she added. We all saw what you did for them and how they treated you. That was 6 months ago. I haven't spoken to my parents or Clara since. From what I hear through the family grapevine, they're struggling financially but still won't admit they made a mistake. Clara and Tom are enjoying their spacious home, my gift, while continuing to badmouth me to anyone who will listen. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently, if I should have seen the warning signs of my family's true nature earlier, if I should have been less generous or more forceful in my expectations. But ultimately, I know I did the right thing, both in buying the house initially and in refusing to be manipulated further. I was tired of sacrificing myself for people who couldn't even recognize the sacrifice. I've started saying no more often at work, too. I've taken up painting classes on weekends and joined a hiking group. I'm dating someone new who values my time and my boundaries. This Christmas, I'm going to New Zealand instead of Bali, and I won't be alone.